At last, the unthinkable has happened. King Charles has finally caved in and stripped Camilla of her royal titles. Before we begin, if you want to stay ahead of every shocking twist inside the palace walls, make sure you subscribe right now so you never miss an update. Tonight's story is not just about a royal disagreement. It's about the moment a king drew a line in the sand, the queen consort was publicly cast aside, and the monarchy itself was reshaped before the world's eyes. This is the story of a family meeting gone terribly wrong, where years of quiet tension erupted into one of the most dramatic confrontations in modern royal history. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for every revelation that follows this monumental shift. The evening was meant to be one of calm reflection. Windsor Castle had been chosen as the setting, with its history of private gatherings and solemn traditions. Officially, this was framed as a night for senior royals to come together, to look back with unity, and to steady themselves for the future. But behind the carefully worded invitations and the closed doors, unease simmered. This wasn't just another family meeting. It was the stage for a reckoning. The king had grown weary, the air was heavy with suspicion, and all eyes were on one figure, Camilla. For Camilla, the evening began with confidence. She walked in expecting her role to be reinforced, believing that her place by the king's side had been secured. For years, she had weathered storms of criticism, winning ground step by step, and she believed tonight would be no different. But her miscalculation was fatal. The atmosphere was not warm, it was cold, brittle, and filled with silent defiance. William and Catherine made their stance clear from the moment they arrived, refusing even the courtesy of acknowledgement toward her. What Camilla thought would be reassurance instead became her isolation, her once assumed support melting into thin air. And at the centre of it all was King Charles. Frail in health, but unexpectedly commanding, he held the room with a stillness that no one dared break. When he spoke, it wasn't with hesitation, but with icy determination. The man who had often been accused of indecision revealed a side rarely seen. A monarch with resolve, sharp enough to silence the room. Every word carried weight, and with those words he prepared to rewrite history in a single stroke. Then came the decree, the moment that stunned everyone in attendance. With no warning, Charles announced that Camilla would no longer hold the title of Queen Consort. The words cut through the silence like a blade, shattering any illusion of unity that remained. For those present, it was more than a decision, it was a shockwave. A crown had been pulled back from her grasp, and the balance of power inside the palace shifted instantly. Camilla's world, built carefully over decades, collapsed in seconds, and the royal family stood frozen in the weight of what had just been declared. The fallout was immediate. Camilla, who had walked in with certainty, found herself stripped of her authority and standing before the family, utterly exposed. The humiliation was unbearable. Shock turned to anger as she lashed out with accusations, her voice trembling between rage and desperation. But her words found no echo. The king's silence was louder than any argument she could make. Charles's icy stare cut her down in front of the very people she believed would defend her. In that moment, the queen consort's aura was gone. What remained was a woman isolated, furious, and powerless. William and Catherine's reaction spoke volumes without a single word. They remained seated, calm and unflinching, offering no support to Camilla and no resistance to Charles. Their silence was its own statement. The future of the monarchy no longer included her. For years, the Prince and Princess of Wales had been careful, deliberate, and measured in their moves. That night revealed the success of their strategy. Catherine had spent time building quiet loyalty among advisors, staff, and the public, while William applied steady but subtle pressure on his father. The combination made Charles's decision not just an act of strength, but the inevitable outcome of a shifting balance of power. Meanwhile, Princess Anne's presence only reinforced the gravity of the moment. Known for her steely resolve, she did not step forward with speeches or dramatic gestures. Instead, she lent her unyielding loyalty to the crown itself, not to individuals, and that silent allegiance spoke volumes. Anne's calm acceptance of her brother's decision underlined that this was not simply a private family spat. It was a defining choice for the monarchy's survival. Camilla had underestimated just how far the tides had turned against her, and by the time she realised it, the walls had already closed in. As Camilla's fury burned, the rest of the room stood in stillness. The contrast was devastating, one woman collapsing into rage and desperation, while the family around her remained firm and unmoved. It was a scene years in the making. Every hidden battle, every whispered doubt, every clash over influence and power had built toward this explosion. And in one evening at Windsor, the final verdict had been delivered. King Charles had not just silenced his consort, he had erased her claim to the crown, leaving behind a monarchy forever altered. For many watching from the inside, it was clear that this confrontation had been brewing for years. Camilla's influence had quietly expanded as she attempted to weave her family into the royal fold, but each step left ripples of unease. The whispers grew louder with every appearance of her relatives in royal circles, with every suggestion that her legacy might stretch beyond her own lifetime. William and Catherine saw the danger early and moved carefully, ensuring the monarchy would remain rooted in the direct line of succession. not diluted by outside ambitions. That quiet resistance set the stage for the king's decisive act at Windsor. Charles's bold move did not emerge from a single evening's frustration. It was the culmination of sleepless nights, fraught discussions, and mounting pressure from all sides. The king, long accused of wavering, finally drew strength from the very fragility of his health. He understood that his time to secure the monarchy's future was limited. By removing Camilla's titles, he restored the crown's trajectory firmly toward William and Catherine, making clear who the pillars of the institution would be in the years ahead. What many had dismissed as impossible was now reality. The king had acted with a cold finality that no one could reverse. Camilla's downfall carried with it an unmistakable symbolism. For decades, she had been at the centre of controversy, fighting to secure her place by Charles's side. Through scandal, public scepticism, and relentless criticism, she had endured and survived. But the stripping of her titles was more devastating than any headline or rumour. It was a judgment delivered not by the press, not by outsiders, but by her own husband, the king himself. That act didn't just wound her standing. It obliterated the authority she had spent a lifetime constructing. The reaction within the royal household was just as telling. Staff who had once been divided between allegiances now saw the writing on the wall. Catherine's careful cultivation of loyalty paid off. Her quiet strength made her the natural centre of stability. William's measured approach ensured that the crown's transition would be viewed not as rebellion, but as continuity. Together they had crafted the conditions in which Charles's decision could not only stand, but thrive. In a single stroke, the monarchy had been refocused, its path redirected away from turmoil, and firmly toward its future leaders. And for Camilla, that meant exile, not necessarily in distance, but in influence. She was no longer the queen consort. She was no longer a force to shape the institution. She was a figure left behind, her authority dismantled by the one person she had always counted on to protect her. The king had caved, yes, but he had caved to the inevitability of the crown's survival, not to Camilla's wishes. The monarchy had transformed, and she was no longer part of its centre. In the days that followed, the shock of Charles's decree rippled far beyond Windsor's stone walls. Courtiers whispered of the confrontation in hushed conversations, while advisors scrambled to adjust to the new reality. It was as though the monarchy had been split in two within a single evening, before and after Camilla's fall. For those closest to the crown, the change was unmistakable. William and Catherine had emerged as the undeniable future, their position no longer shadowed by competing influence. What had once been a simmering struggle behind the scenes was now settled in the open. Camilla, however, did not retreat quietly. Reports from those within her circle spoke of her bitterness, her insistence that she had been betrayed, and her determination to claw back what had been taken. Yet the strength she once wielded was gone. Every attempt to rally support met with silence or polite distance. Even those who had once leaned in her favour now avoided association, wary of being on the wrong side of the crown. It was the cruelest of ironies. She had believed herself untouchable, yet when her titles were stripped away, she found herself with nothing solid left to stand on. The king, meanwhile, remained resolute. Though visibly frail, Charles carried himself with a newfound authority, as if the burden of indecision had finally lifted. He had made his choice, and he would not waver. Those close to him noted that the very act of silencing Camilla gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He had secured his legacy not by protecting his consort, but by preserving the line of succession. For a monarch so often criticised for hesitation, this decision would stand as his boldest, even ruthless, moment of rule. For William and Catherine, the path was clear. They did not need to gloat, nor did they need to speak out. Their victory lay in their silence, in the calm assurance that the crown was now leaning firmly in their direction. Catherine's subtle influence, paired with William's steady hand, had reshaped the balance of power without open conflict. The Windsor gathering had not only marked Camilla's downfall, but had also cemented the Waleses as the monarchy's centre of gravity. Every gesture, every quiet act of loyalty from those around them pointed to the same conclusion. The future had arrived, and for the public, the spectacle of Camilla's collapse was more than just palace drama. It was a rare glimpse into the fragility and ferocity of royal life. The monarchy, often seen as unshakable, revealed its cracks, its rivalries, and its ruthless ability to protect itself. One woman's downfall had become a symbol of the institution's determination to survive at any cost. And in that survival, a new era had already begun. As the dust began to settle, the deeper meaning of Charles's decision came into sharp focus. Stripping Camilla of her titles was not merely a personal rebuke, it was a public declaration that the crown must remain untangled from private ambitions. The monarchy's strength has always relied on its ability to project unity, tradition, and continuity. Camilla's presence had, in the eyes of many, disrupted that balance. By removing her, Charles reasserted the monarchy's purpose. to safeguard the throne for the direct line and ensure the institution's survival beyond his reign. Behind closed doors, years of tension had boiled toward this moment. Camilla's attempts to extend her influence had not gone unnoticed, introducing her family into royal circles, pressing for recognition beyond her own position, and testing the boundaries of her role. For William and Catherine, these moves represented not just personal overreach, but a threat to the clarity of succession. Their quiet resistance, subtle but unwavering, eroded her foundation bit by bit. By the time Windsor's meeting arrived, Camilla's authority was already weakened, and Charles's decree only confirmed what had long been inevitable. The drama of the confrontation, however, did not end with Charles's words. Camilla's fury remained palpable, her collapse into rage echoing through the halls like a final act of defiance. Yet it only deepened her isolation. Where once her outbursts might have been tolerated or even excused, they now appeared pitiful, reminders of a power that had slipped irretrievably away. Her collapse was more than emotional, it was symbolic. The woman who had spent decades clawing her way into the crown's embrace was now cast out by the very hand that had lifted her there. For Charles, the consequences of his decision stretched far beyond that single night. Though he had caved in, as some whispered, he had also reclaimed control. The King's Act was both surrender and assertion. Surrender to the inevitability of the Wales's ascendancy, and assertion that the crown was still his to shape, even in weakness. In one sweeping gesture, he showed that frailty did not mean indecision. The move, shocking as it was, reminded everyone that he alone held the power to define the monarchy in his reign. And for William and Catherine, this was the moment that transformed perception into reality. No longer were they just heirs waiting in the wings. They were the heart of the monarchy's future, positioned firmly at its centre. Every whisper of doubt had been silenced, every rival cleared away. The palace walls themselves seemed to echo the shift. The crown belonged to them in all but name. Camilla's downfall was not just her loss. It was their triumph and the beginning of a new chapter for the monarchy. The magnitude of that Windsor evening could not be overstated. What unfolded in that closed chamber was not only a confrontation between a husband and wife, but a public reckoning with decades of unresolved tension. By removing Camilla's titles, Charles had upended the narrative that had defined their relationship for so long. For years, she had been the figure at his side, elevated step by step, shaping her image into something unshakable. But in one moment, all of that vanished. What lingered was not the story of triumph over scandal, but the story of downfall, betrayal, and the limits of ambition. Camilla's collapse that night was not simply emotional, it was the unravelling of a persona. To see her fury boil over in front of the family, to hear her hurl accusations only to be met with Charles's silence, was to witness the exact reversal of the control she thought she possessed. Those who had watched her rise now saw her stripped bare, her authority gone, her dignity shattered, and in the stillness that followed, the crown itself seemed to exhale, as if a weight had been lifted from its shoulders. For Charles, the act was both painful and liberating. He had loved, defended, and protected Camilla for decades, enduring storms of criticism to keep her at his side. Yet he also bore the heavy responsibility of a crown that demanded sacrifice, even of his closest bond. By stripping her of her titles, he chose the monarchy over his consort, duty over affection. It was a ruthless act, but also one that reaffirmed his role as king. Those present could sense that Charles had found in his frailty an unexpected strength, an awareness that time was slipping away, and with it, the opportunity to secure the monarchy's future. And that future was clear. William and Catherine, long waiting patiently, had emerged from the shadows with undeniable authority. They did not have to lift a finger during the meeting. Their silence, their calm demeanour, their refusal to even acknowledge Camilla, spoke louder than any confrontation could have. Behind the scenes, their strategy had been meticulous. Catherine cultivated loyalty among staff and courtiers, who admired her steadiness and grace. William carried himself with quiet assurance, embodying the image of a monarch in waiting who would not allow the institution to falter. Together they made themselves indispensable. And Charles recognised it. Princess Anne too played her role with steely precision. She said little, but her very presence carried weight. Anne had always been a pillar of discipline, her loyalty to the crown absolute. By aligning herself silently with Charles's decision, she underscored the seriousness of the moment. Her presence served as an anchor. This was not just a family feud, but a constitutional necessity. And with Anne's unspoken support, Charles's decree carried a legitimacy that could not be challenged. The image of Camilla that night, isolated, raging, silenced, was more than just a moment of personal defeat. It became a symbol of the monarchy's ruthless ability to protect itself. For years, she had been woven into its fabric. But in the end, the institution shed her as easily as removing a title, leaving her stranded on the outside. That night, a queen consort ceased to exist, and a monarchy transformed itself to endure. In the aftermath, Windsor Castle seemed quieter, yet the silence carried an unmistakable weight. Those who had been present replayed the scene over and over in their minds, trying to grasp the sheer finality of it. A title once bestowed with pomp and ceremony had been torn away in a moment of cold declaration. The shock of it lingered like a chill in the corridors, as though the stones themselves remembered the echo of Charles's voice. For the family, the meeting had ended. But for the monarchy, it was only the beginning of a new chapter. Camilla's isolation deepened with every passing day. Where she had once enjoyed the subtle power of proximity, she now found herself met with polite indifference. Her calls went unanswered, her presence was avoided, and the circles that once bent toward her influence now bent away. Even within her own household, loyalty wavered. Staff who had once spoken of her with respect now looked elsewhere for guidance. The Queen Consort, who had fought so long for acceptance, had become an outsider almost overnight. It was a fall more dramatic than anything she had ever endured before, and this time there was no return. Charles, on the other hand, seemed almost transformed. Though still frail, he carried himself with a sharpness of purpose, as if the decision had given him a second wind. He had acted with a boldness no one expected, and in doing so, he reasserted his authority, not just over the crown, but over his own legacy. For a monarch who had lived his life under scrutiny, accused of indecision and hesitation, this act became the defining mark of his reign. Stripping Camilla of her titles was not just about ending her influence. It was about proving that he could still wield power when it mattered most. William and Catherine moved carefully in the days that followed, aware that their silence was their greatest strength. They did not need to speak openly about what had transpired. Their presence, their composure, and the loyalty they inspired said enough. For courtiers and advisors, it was clear the crown had shifted towards them, and their ascendancy was now undeniable. Catherine, in particular, had mastered the art of quiet influence. Without raising her voice, she had become the trusted anchor for many within the household. William's steady presence only reinforced the sense that the monarchy's future was no longer in question. It was already taking shape. The public too could sense that something monumental had occurred. Whispers spread quickly, carried by speculation and subtle signals. Though the official statements remained carefully worded, the truth emerged between the lines. Camilla was gone from the heart of power, and a new era had begun. For those who had doubted whether the monarchy could adapt, the message was clear. It had survived yet another internal storm, casting aside what it could no longer carry. In the shadow of Windsor's walls, a monarchy once again proved its ruthless resilience, ensuring that its survival outweighed any single individual. As the weeks stretched on, the Windsor confrontation took on the weight of legend within royal circles. What had been a single evening's drama became a defining moment, replayed in endless whispers, each retelling carrying new shades of awe and disbelief. The family meeting, meant to steady the crown, had instead fractured it and rebuilt it in an entirely new shape. Camilla's downfall was no longer just a scandal. It was history, etched into the story of the monarchy itself. Camilla's life in the aftermath was marked by a painful contrast. Once draped in jewels and seated at the king's side, she now moved like a ghost at the edges of the institution. Invitations that once flowed to her doorstep slowed to a trickle, and when she did appear in public, the air around her felt heavier, colder, touched with the knowledge of her lost standing. Every smile looked forced, every wave seemed strained. She was a woman who had reached the summit, only to be cast down by the very hand that had lifted her there. The weight of that irony followed her everywhere. For Charles, the decision lingered as both a triumph and a burden. He had acted with decisive force, but it came at a personal cost. Stripping Camilla of her titles had restored the monarchy's direction. Yet it also placed distance between himself and the woman who had been his companion for decades. Those close to him observed the toll it took in quiet moments. An air of melancholy that clung to him even as he carried out his duties with renewed authority. The king had proven his strength, but in doing so, he had also revealed the lonely price of duty. William and Catherine, by contrast, thrived in the shifting landscape. Every appearance they made together was a silent declaration of stability, unity, and the promise of the future. The public, weary of drama and scandal, gravitated toward them with renewed warmth. Catherine's grace and quiet composure gave reassurance that the monarchy was in steady hands, while William's presence suggested a king in waiting, who understood both tradition and change. Together, they embodied exactly what the institution needed in the wake of Camilla's collapse, a vision of endurance, and Princess Anne remained the steadfast pillar in the background, her loyalty to the crown standing as a reminder that the monarchy was larger than any one individual. Her silent role in Windsor's decisive night underscored the truth of the institution. It could bend, it could fracture, but it would always survive. The stripping of Camilla's titles was proof of that resilience. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was survival. And in that survival, a monarchy that many thought fragile showed that it was, once again, unyielding. In the months that followed, the shock of Camilla's removal settled into something even more powerful: permanence. The Windsor decree was not a passing storm or a temporary humiliation. It was the irreversible end of her reign as Queen Consort. Courtiers stopped using her title without hesitation. Public programmes quietly erased her name. and ceremonial roles she once held were handed off to others without fanfare. The monarchy had closed the book on her chapter with a swiftness that left no room for reversal. The very speed with which she was erased made the message clear. She was gone, and the crown had already moved on. Camilla struggled under the weight of that erasure. Every attempt to maintain her dignity seemed hollow against the enormity of what she had lost. Her allies dwindled. Her presence in royal life shrank to the smallest of gestures, and she found herself clinging to fragments of relevance that slipped through her hands like sand. To the world, she was no longer the queen consort, but a fallen figure whose name was forever tied to one of the most dramatic downfalls in modern royal history. For someone who had spent decades fighting her way into the monarchy's embrace, the silence that now surrounded her was unbearable. Charles, however, carried on with surprising clarity. His act at Windsor had reshaped his reign, granting him a sense of finality and authority that no advisor could challenge. Though frailty still shadowed his health, his decision had ensured that his legacy would not be remembered for hesitation, but for the boldness of his choice. He had chosen survival over sentiment, institution over individual, and in doing so, he had carved a place in history as the monarch who preserved the line by sacrificing the consort he once defended above all others. For William and Catherine, the transformation was unmistakable. Their role shifted from heirs in waiting to leaders in practice. Each public engagement carried new weight. Their appearances no longer framed as glimpses of the future, but as demonstrations of the present. The loyalty of staff and advisors cemented further. Courtiers who had once balanced their allegiance now leaned fully toward the Walesers. They became the living embodiment of stability, at a time when the monarchy most needed it, proving that the crown's endurance was safe in their hands. The monarchy itself emerged from the storm battered but unbroken. If anything, it had been sharpened by the confrontation. The Windsor meeting had exposed the cracks and rivalries within the family, but it had also demonstrated the crown's ability to cut away what it could no longer carry. Camilla's downfall was shocking, but it reinforced the brutal truth that the monarchy survives not by clinging to individuals, but by protecting the throne itself. And in that truth, the future of the institution stood clearer than ever. By the time the dust fully settled, the Windsor confrontation had taken its place among the defining moments of royal history. What began as a private evening of reflection had ended with a stunning act of authority. King Charles stripping Camilla of her royal titles in front of the family itself. The echoes of that night never faded, for it was more than just scandal or family discord. It was the monarchy reminding the world, and itself, that no individual stands above the crown. Camilla's collapse, dramatic and public, became a cautionary tale. For decades, she had fought against criticism, endured relentless scrutiny, and finally secured a place at the king's side. But in her miscalculation, she underestimated the tide shifting against her. She believed her role was secure, that her influence was beyond challenge. Yet in one evening, she was reduced to silence, cast aside with finality. Her rage, her accusations, her desperate struggle to hold on, all of it dissolved in the face of the king's icy decree. And when it was over, she was left with nothing but the memory of a crown that had slipped through her fingers. For Charles, the act was the defining stroke of his reign. Frailty had been replaced with resolve, hesitation with ruthlessness. Though some whispered he had caved in, the truth was far more complex. He had surrendered not to weakness, but to necessity. He understood that his time as monarch was limited, and that the future of the institution could not afford the weight of division. By stripping Camilla of her titles, he secured the clarity of succession, ensuring that the monarchy would outlast the turmoil of the present. His reign may be remembered as short, but it would never be remembered as indecisive. William and Catherine, standing silent but steadfast, emerged as the undeniable future. Their composure, their strategy, and their quiet accumulation of loyalty had paved the way for this moment. When Camilla fell, they did not need to raise their voices or lift a hand. The crown itself tilted naturally toward them. The public saw them not as distant heirs, but as the living centre of the monarchy, steady and unshakable. The family saw it too. In Windsor's confrontation, the Waleses became not just the promise of tomorrow, but the power of today. And so, the monarchy was transformed. A queen consort was stripped of her titles, a king proved his strength in the face of frailty, and the heirs secured their place in destiny's spotlight. The Windsor meeting will be remembered as the night when everything changed, when silence carried more power than words, and when the crown reminded the world of its most enduring truth. Individuals rise and fall, but the monarchy survives.